Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Alumni Association's webinar series. My name is Erin Elliott and I'm the Senior Director of Campus Engagement and your host today. Thank you to all alumni and friends who have made time to join us for Purpose, Passion, and a Paycheck, the rise of Encore Careers. People crave meaning and purpose in their lives and in their work. The drive for purpose fuels career decisions across the lifespan as people explore ways to find work that connects with meaning, purpose, and impact. This webinar will explore generational trends towards meaningful work with an emphasis on Encore Careers, career shifts at midlife and beyond into the social sector work. Trends will be highlighted and pathways to Encore work will be identified. Thoughts on how to transfer skills and talents for the for-profit sector into social sector roles will be explored. Today's webinar is part of an ongoing free series offered by the Alumni Association. We're having conversations with experts about career, life, and learning topics. We started 3 years ago, and since then we've had over 6,800 day of attendees and over 18,000 total YouTube views of the webinars. And we're excited to enter in our fourth season bringing alumni, students, and friends to these webinars. Initiatives like this webinar series are made possible in part by our Alumni Association members. Thank you. Because of our members, we can create powerful opportunities for students and our more than 477,000 alumni around the world. If you're interested in joining the Alumni Association and supporting our work, check us out at umnalumni.org/membership. We do have an upcoming webinar on October 5th. We have Beyond Diversity 101, so if you can join us for that, that would be great. And also some upcoming in-person events. We have our Emerging Professionals Network on October 2nd. We have our U of M Day of Service on October 14th. And on October 21st, we have Homecoming, so join us for SkyUmania. All of these events are listed on umnalumni.org/virtual. So before we get started today, I would just like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speakers system by default. If you prefer to listen over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel, and a dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer speakers, this can be caused by having multiple software applications open, which can use up your computer's bandwidth and affect network performance. Listening on a wireless signal may affect the performance as well. So feel free to close any of those unnecessary applications on your computer. Questions. Questions are welcome and you may submit them at any time. Please type in your questions in the questions pane of your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be monitoring them along the way, so please submit your questions, ideas, or tips. This is going to be a fun conversation and we definitely want to hear from you. So now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Kate Schaefers, PhD. LP is the Executive Director of the University of Minnesota Advanced Careers UMAC initiative, bringing people 50+ back to campus to figure out what is next in their careers and lives. She is a psychologist, a consultant, a coach, and a passion for aligning individual talents with meaningful work. Dr. Schaefers is a volunteer state president for AARP Minnesota and the founding board member of SHIFT, a Twin Cities nonprofit facilitating career change in the second half of life. So, welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Erin.
Right, we're just going to switch over here, and here we go.
Erin, I'm thrilled to be here, and welcome, everyone. I'd like to just start off with our agenda. We're going to be talking about purpose over the lifespan, and Encore Careers, which are combining passion, paycheck, and purpose, and some pathways to Encore work. But I'd like to start with a story. I want to tell you a little bit about Sister Berno Flint. Sister Berno, I met her when she was 78 years old, and she had just retired from a career as an administrator, a hospital administrator. And this was a second career for Sister Berno. She started off as a nurse and worked as a nurse for many years and then went into hospital administration. But when I met her at 78, she was launching yet another career. In her Encore, she wanted to do something that was aligned with one of her loves, which was needlework. She did tatting and created lace. And so she wanted to have something that was more creative, but in typical fashion, she also wanted to have it to have an impact. And so she started making doilies and products that would be sold in the gift shop in the convent. Then she started a sales career in that gift shop and found that she was quite good at it. She was able to listen to customers and pick out just the right gift for people to share with others. At 91, she retired again. At this point, she launched into a volunteer career. She helped out people, some of the older adults that she interacted with. So at 91, she was helping out the older folks. And one of the things that was just so powerful in my interactions with Sister Berno is that throughout all of these careers, as a nurse, as an administrator, as an artist, as a salesperson, as a volunteer, Sister Berno described all of her work as having impact and purpose and finding meaning in every one of those roles. Now, she used some of the skills across those roles, like for instance, her listening and her caring were things that she used as a nurse and she also used as a salesperson. But then she also used some other skills that she yearned to use that she really found fulfilling, like working on her art, her needlework. Sister Berno lived to age 101. And so this is the other piece that I think is important as we think about purpose across the lifespan, that she had a sense of purpose until the end. And this was something that was part of who she was and gave her life meaning and helped her stay engaged. So what I'd like to also now talk about is, what do we mean by purpose? And we know that there's a strong sense that purpose comes from you, that it comes from an individual, that it expresses what's important to you, what it is that is fulfilling for you. So there's a piece of it that is individual and driven by what's intrinsic to you. But what we do know is that when people have a sense of purpose, we see some positive outcomes, like health and happiness and longevity, as Sister Berno showed us. So what I have here is one definition of purpose, and this comes from Richard Leiter. And Richard Leiter is an author, he's a writer, he's a speaker, he's a thought leader. Some of you may have come across some of his books. One of them is called The Power of Purpose. But he talks about purpose as being your aim or goal, your reason for being, your reason for getting up in the morning. And all of these things, as we see that when we have that reason to get up in the morning, when we have a reason that is linked with something important to us, that the work we're doing, that it's very powerful and helps us with regards to feeling connected with what we're doing and some of those positive outcomes like health and happiness and even longevity. And when we think about work, it's also important to think about what role does work play when we think about our overall purpose. So we spend significant parts of our lives at work, and that workplace is a lot more than a paycheck. You know, we are integrally related to our jobs. We find our sense of identity. How do we introduce ourselves to one another? It's usually through what we do. We get a sense of accomplishment through work. We have social interaction. We even have rhythm to our days through workplace. And sometimes we're not necessarily wanting that alarm clock to go off, but it gives us a time to get up, a time to come home, a vacation time. I mean, it does structure our lives in ways that offer us a sense of purpose and direction. And it's intellectually challenging. It's a place where we have enrichment. And so all of these things are part of work, and that's why it's so important when we think about work to also think about purpose and how it fulfills you. So stepping back from this concept of purpose, I want to talk a little bit about what makes life and work meaningful for us. And again, there's many ways that purpose and meaning are expressed through our work. Paul Farrell has studied this whole concept about what is meaningful work and what are those components. And he's distilled the research down into 4 buckets of what it means to have work be meaningful for us. The first is self-actualizing work. It's realizing our potential, our purpose, expressing our values, our goals, and oftentimes this is connected with the workplace. It's also a sense of social impact, feeling like what we do has a positive impact on people, on our organizations, that what we do is linked to some kind of outcome in the workplace. Work is also a place where we have personal accomplishment, and that adds a lot of meaning to us as well. To feel like we can accomplish something, we set goals, we reach those goals, we become very proud of what we do. And then the 4th is career advancement, a belief that we can achieve our highest career goals in our workplace. And again, that can be very rewarding, very meaningful when we feel like what we're learning in the workplace is also helping us advance our careers and move in directions we want to go. But what's really interesting about this is that when we look at work, we know that what's important to us is not static. So that we see some shifting in our own lives about what comes out for us as being most important at different life stages, when we are dealing with different parts of our lives which become more important. And we know that in his studies, when we look at this, we see some shifting that happens with some of these areas of interest. And so we know that when we have a sense of purpose, when we have what's really important to us at that life stage, we also tend to see positive organizational outcomes, such as we see greater job satisfaction, greater organizational commitment, more engagement. And again, so thinking about what's important at your life stage and thinking about ways that that can be expressed at your workplace are also important for you as well as important for your employer. Now, it's interesting when we think about a lot of the conversation in the popular press or in the business press has to do with millennials and the importance of purpose and meaningful work for millennials. Now, today millennials make up about 35% of the workforce, so it's no surprise that employers are worried about millennials and how to engage them, how to keep them, how to retain them. We also look at boomers and Generation X. They each make up about 31% of the workforce, and so we do have other generations in the workplace as well that we are looking at. But millennials are driving some of this current interest in purpose and meaning, and part of that is some studies that have come out. For instance, Deloitte in 2015 found that 60% of millennials said that a sense of purpose guided their job choice. And Fidelity recently did a study in 2016, and they found that 58% of millennials prioritize quality of work over pay when they look at a job. And then we also know that for millennials, they do place a lot of importance in doing business with organizations and connecting with brands that have pro-social messages, that are sustainable in how they do their business, that they have ethical business standards. So we're seeing a lot of attention on what millennials want, but what's clear when you look at the research literature or you look at Farrell's work and other studies is that this isn't necessarily just a characteristic of millennials, that in fact we see this over the life course, that we see people from all generations prioritizing some of these things. But what we do see is that what is most important may ebb and flow in our lives. And so what those areas of meaning may have different importance and relevance to us at different life stages. And so that self-actualizing work, that social impact, that personal accomplishment, that career advancement, we know that those things shift over time, and I think the idea of thinking of it as a kaleidoscope can be really helpful. I'd like to give credit to Lisa Monero and Sherry Sullivan, who initially used that terminology to say, how do we look at what's important at different life stages, and as well as for men and women, they were looking at gender differences. But what we see is that all of these dimensions, that self-actualizing work, social impact, personal accomplishment, career advancement, meaningful work, work-life balance, I mean, all of these things are important, but what comes to the forefront may shift as we age or as we go through different life stages. And I think we all know that from our own experiences. What was important at 20 is not necessarily what's important at 40 or 60 or 80. And so while there might be some commonalities, that what is driving us and helping to shape what we're looking for out of work does shift over time. So being aware that the way purpose is expressed can shift over time. The other thing, this is a recent study that came out of LinkedIn and Imperative, and this looked at the percent of different generations who are purpose-oriented. And what we mean by that is that they see a sense of purpose as being primary in how they look at their work. And so what we find with this is that we see an increase in the number of people across these generations as they get older in people who are purpose-oriented. So what they're looking for out of work and how they see work fitting into their lives, that purpose piece is stronger for a baby boomer than it is for millennials. So even though that may not be intuitive with some of the most recent attention on millennials, that this is reflecting more what we see as a life stage issue, that again at 50 plus, that need for purpose is shifting more, and more people are seeing that as being central versus earning an income or status is what are the 3 dimensions that the LinkedIn study looked at. And so when we look at millennials, we know it's important. 30% see themselves as purpose-oriented, so that is core to who they are. That's a pretty big percentage. But with Gen X, we're seeing 38%. And Gen X, they're in those midlife years, and midlife is often a time when we start thinking about if we don't do things now, when? I mean, some of that awareness that time isn't infinite, and that if we want to make career changes, now is the time. And so it's that midlife shifts. I'd like to also say that most people do not experience that midlife as a crisis, but it's more of a recalibration of looking at what's most important and living a life in a way that reflects that. And again, baby boomers, as they're looking at that late career or shifting into what was traditionally retirement, we are seeing that there is a sense of their percentage, 48% are saying that this is important. And so this is something that we need to look at. And so, you know, again, we see this need for generativity with people as they enter their 50s that need to give back, to contribute to the next generation, to leave a legacy. But what I want you to take from this, though, is that that sense of purpose is important across the lifespan, and again, that kaleidoscope idea. So as we think about Encore and think about some of the life course perspectives, some of these trends, I think it's helpful to step back and think about what it is that, what we can learn from life course as well. And so there's some things going on just from regards to longevity and advances in health, that what we're seeing is that we are changing the realities for how people are entering these traditional ages, which were once thought of as retirement ages. So for someone who's 65 today, for a man, he can expect to live on average 16 more years. For a woman, it's 19 more years. So what we're talking about is this is real gains in years, and those years are happening at a time when people are still engaged and physically active. And I'm making some generalizations because I know this isn't true for everyone, but when you look at that generation of 55 to 70-year-olds, we see highly educated, we see health and wellness, we see the ability to continue contributing in their communities. And a lot of people are trying to figure out, well, what do we call this life stage? Because when people are, let's say, 62 and you call them a senior citizen, they will feel that that doesn't describe who they are, because we as a society have all of these concepts of what does it mean to be elderly, what does it mean to be a senior, and what people are finding at these life stages is it doesn't fit. The image of what we see or we think about with those terms doesn't fit with the reality that they experience or how they feel it. And so what we're finding is that we have this new life stage. Phyllis Moen, a professor, she's a McKnight Presidential Scholar here at the University of Minnesota, she's calling it Encore Adulthood, and she's placing this between midlife or middle age and retiree, senior, elderly. And this life stage can be 15 to 20 years, and it's a time that is being redefined, that we're driving a revolution in how people see this stage of life. And just for some context on this, that, you know, before 1900, we really didn't have an idea of what adolescence meant as a concept. Adolescence is socially constructed, that we saw that there's something different about young adults who are in those teen years. It's different from childhood, but it's not quite adulthood. And so we created this concept of adolescence to help us understand this life stage. We're also seeing a similar kind of life stage emerging in this young adult stage. So we're looking at that, you know, young adult is not necessarily a universal term, that we're seeing people from 18 to 25 maybe launching a little different than previous generations. They're staying in school longer, they're moving back home, they're delaying some things like marriage and housing, buying houses, and the things that used to be those pillars of adulthood. And so some scholars are calling that emerging adulthood. So again, we recognize that there's a stage it's before elderly or senior comes into play, where there's a time for lifelong learning, there's a time for launching new careers, and that it's an exciting time to think about this as a new life stage that could be up to 20 years long. And I want to mention, so I mentioned Dr. Phyllis Moen, and so she has a book that came out last year called Encore Adulthood, Boomers on the Edge of Risk, Renewal, and Purpose. And she distills down a tremendous amount of research and study and thinking and theories into a very readable book that is accessible to everyone, in the sense that even though she's an academic, this book is very accessible and makes a lot of sense. But she also argues not only are we having this new Encore Adulthood, but we also need to look at, not having people be on the sidelines. So we need to have some structural changes, some institutional changes that expand beyond that help extrapolate to what is next. So now I'd like to talk about, so what do we do with this? We know we've got this life stage. We know that meaning and purpose are more important, that people are looking for that meaningful work. And I do think that this is an important thing to think about, like, how are people expressing this? How is this coming out in work? And there's this concept of Encore Careers that is surfacing and is getting some momentum. And this first was proposed in a formal way by Mark Friedman, who is the CEO of Encore.org. And he sees himself as part of a movement to support career changes at midlife and midlife and beyond, that combine income, meaning, and social impact, so that passion, purpose, and a paycheck. And Encore is really about connecting opportunity with what it is that the world needs out there. This quote is from Marcy Albahar. She has a book out, the Encore Career Handbook. I'll mention that in a little. But it's this, what happens as we move into midlife and beyond, that helps coalesce into what it is we're looking for. And there's a piece of that being work that's meaningful with purpose, as well as a paycheck. And again, it's balancing, as a society, the opportunity for all the skills that are out there with what are the needs of nonprofits, our social sector. How do we balance these things, and how do we take advantage of that skill set for some of the needs that are out there as a society? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the numbers, because I think this is relevant as we think about the level of interest out there. So Encore.org in 2014 did a survey of 50 to 70-year-olds to look at Encore interest and people that have already made transitions into Encore. And they found and extrapolated from their surveys that about 4.5 million people in 2014 had already moved into Encore Careers. So those are career changes at midlife and beyond that combine passion, purpose, and a paycheck. So about 4.5 million people had already made those changes. What's interesting is that they estimated that another 21 million people want to be moving into those kinds of roles by 2020. And so this is a significant number of people who are looking for that kind of meaningful work that they want to be including into their plans as they look at what's next. And I think it's also critically important to look at that when asked, people are looking at this as being a significant transition and a commitment. They're estimating between 5 to 14 years in these Encore roles. Now that compares to a median job tenure of 6 years. So if you look at overall people, how long do they stay in jobs? It's about 6 years. So in other words, people looking for Encores are going to be staying, even a median number of years in those roles. So it's not like someone wants to go in and spend 6 months to a year doing something and is looking for something else. These people are looking at significant changes. And so this is a really important thing as we think about the numbers and the interest. And then it's also interesting to note that in asking these folks who have already transitioned, about 70% said that they were doing something different from their primary careers. And so it wasn't just that they were working in IT and then started working in IT in a nonprofit, but they were doing something different. And I think that reflects a bit of what we saw with Sister Bruno's story of having something else that she wanted to do, she wanted to experiment with, a different side of herself. But there's also then people who do continue on in those similar roles that are driven by that desire to do something more that's aligned with what their purpose is. The other thing that I think is really important to look at is that when we look at people who are interested in Encore Careers, there is a sense of just, is this just for people who are, elitist in a sense, that they have the ability to step back from work and go into something that they really want to do? When we look at the research on people who are going into this, we do see that many of them have some college, 42% have some college, 38% have a college degree or higher, but we also have 19% are high school educated. So we see some diversity there. We also see diversity across socioeconomic backgrounds, interests, and skill sets. And so this isn't just one group of people that are looking at this, but we see some diversity in who's interested in this. Now, when we look at why people say that they are interested in Encore Careers, there's lots of motivators. And again, these look a lot like some of those things that we looked at of what makes meaningful work. But it's looking for work that gives people pride in themselves and their work, personal satisfaction, wanting an interesting life, giving a chance to demonstrate and use skills, feeling worthwhile, passing on those skills to the next generation. Again, the majority of people are motivated by these things. They're motivated in making a change because they want more of that in their work. And this is really important to them as they look at that, what kinds of things they want to be doing, that they're driven by some of these dimensions and wanting that to be part of their work. But the other interesting thing, I think, when you interview people who have made these kinds of transitions is that there's also an openness to challenge. So it's not that people are just looking to fulfill their own needs for meaning or purpose, but they're also open to taking on some challenging issues, tackling some things that are really important to them. So this quote by Professor Rosameth Moss-Cantor from Harvard, "The happiest people I know are dedicated to dealing with the most difficult problems. They face the seemingly worst of the world with a conviction that they can do something about it and serve others." So again, that sense of challenge, that sense of stretching, that sense of serving can also be incredibly motivating for people. And Elizabeth Moss-Cantor gave us this perspective, but it also plays out in a lot of research. So this desire to see, wanting to have, being willing to take on some of these challenges and working towards goals that are meaningful for us and that challenge us, that those drivers come through. And I see that we do have a question about ageism and employers and how we look at that. I'm going to take a break to answer and to address that issue. And Daniel's question has to say, I'm going to read his question. Can we honestly say that there is no age bias among employers? While job applications cannot request your age, most employers can extrapolate an applicant's resume. The dates in which you have received your various degrees, the amount of employment history that you list, all signal your age bracket. I am talking about finding purpose and meaning and making career transitions, but Daniel raises a very important question and a point that I think is worth discussing is this: what degree does ageism play? And yes, there is ageism in the workplace. I think that many people who have lost their jobs and are in career transition, when we look at who is part of the long-term unemployed, people who have lost their jobs and are looking for jobs, people 50 plus are overrepresented in that group, and it's not that their skills are not up to date per se, but it's oftentimes stereotypes with that. So there is a sense of ageism. On the other hand, I do think there is an evolving awareness with regards to employers that they need talent, and so I think we may see some shifts with that as we see a tighter labor market and the need to bring in talent in our organizations. But it's not a simple answer, and so Daniel's question is is true that there is challenge with that, and some employers will look at that. There's some things, Daniel, that I think you can do to make yourself look more relevant and current and dispel some of those myths about an older worker, including experimenting with new skills, doing volunteer work, keeping your technology up to date, being on Twitter and showing that you know how to use technology like LinkedIn for professional reasons. So there's things you can do to help overcome some of that, but there's also some challenges that older workers face. That said, though, I think, as we think about who are making these changes and these Encore careers, all of the examples are people who are 50 plus, who are reinventing themselves. So I hope to give you some hope on that, that there are ways to do it, and there are organizations that value experience and they value perspective with that. So I'd like to actually mention 3 people as examples of individuals who have taken the skills that they have developed in one place and they're applying them in a different way. They've made Encore transitions. Melanie Smith, I'd like to mention first. She was an urban planner, and so she had a background in planning, marketing, community engagement, and in her Encore, she worked on a project for Playworks, which is a California nonprofit that harnesses play in schools. What she did is she surveyed staff in Southern California Playworks schools and developed a best practice toolkit and recommendations for staff engagement. So she brought some wonderful skills that Playworks needed, and she applied them in a different way. Now, she worked on a project, so hers was project-based, but she brought that talent into her nonprofit role. Another example is Larry Jennison. Larry was a letter carrier, and he retired from that role with the post office, and he now is a stipend and volunteer literacy tutor with Experience Corps. Experience Corps places older adults in classrooms, typically in underfunded schools, and Larry is working with kids that have a large number of students to teacher ratios. He's been working there for 6 years. He works 3 days a week, 5 hours a day. It's a significant contribution. He does earn a stipend for that work, but he's part of that education team helping kids kindergarten through grade 3 work on literacy skills, a critically important area. And also I'd like to mention Lou Silberman. Lou is a high school teacher, and he retired from that, and he leveraged his high school curriculum development and teaching skills to implement a staff development and training plan for 3,000 social service agency employees with an organization called Aspiranet. And so again, these are all people that have skills that these nonprofits saw the value in and saw a way to bring the benefit of that into their organizations. And so again, there's lots of stories of people who are doing this in varying capacities. And then I also do want to mention that nonprofits are increasingly seeing the benefit of bringing in people 50 plus as skill-based volunteers, but also as employees. And so in one survey, the Encore Impact Project, a study of Encore talent at work, done in 2016, this was a survey of nonprofits. 91% said that Encore person who came into their organization positively impacted their community, that 79% said they positively impact their social mission, 73% positively impacted their organizational capacity. So again, getting back to Daniel's question, I think as organizations see the benefit that people with skills bring in, that they also are going to see beyond the gray hair and may actually see some potential with that and see value that comes with the skills that come from experience. So as people think about getting into nonprofits and exploring what kind of ways they want to contribute, exploring Encores, some people are driven by a passion for a cause. So what they're doing is they look at something that they feel passionate about, a cause, a demographic, an issue that they feel compelled to do something about. And these people find their way into Encores because they're driven by this need to make a difference in some specific area. I'll give you an example. A woman named Michelle Ross, she left a marketing executive position in Silicon Valley to do an Encore fellowship at Aspiranet, which is that social service organization I mentioned in California. And she specifically wanted to work with foster children, foster care children. Her driver for that was that her mother was a product of the foster care system, and she saw how critically important that system was to her mother and shaping her mother and providing her mother with the opportunities that she needed in life. So Michelle was driven by that because she wanted to help children in foster care, and so that drove her, and she got involved with a nonprofit through a fellowship to do some work with Aspiranet. But for many people, it's not necessarily the cause that's driving them. And I call this that, you know, there's a lot of people who are cause fluid. And what I mean by that is they can get excited and engaged by a variety of issues and causes. And they're more focused on using their skills to make a difference, to connecting and engaging their skills in a way that contributes to an organization, impacts people, and gives them a way to share what they know and share with that next generation. And so, you know, some people think that everyone needs to have this passion, and I really strongly believe that there's many ways that passion and purpose and meaning can be expressed. And so for some people, if you get connected and get excited and get in a sense of flow using skills, then thinking about how your skills might translate into a social impact career or a skill-based volunteering might also help you find that sense of encore. So using your skills in a nonprofit, you'll need to figure out how to tell that story about how those skills translate into that nonprofit. So some skills like IT, it's easy to see how to translate what you may have learned in a for-profit role into a nonprofit. Other skills, you may need to use a different way to tell that story. Like, for instance, sales and marketing in a for-profit may be described in certain ways. In a nonprofit may be described more as development or fundraising. So again, it's that language and telling a story that resonates and finding a way to translate what you do into another kind of organization that is focused more on nonprofit or social impact. So I'm going to give you an example of this. Ruth Savronsky. Ruth was an attorney. She was an attorney for 30 years, and she left that position but wanted to do something more. And she was hired on by Hartford Symphony Orchestra as Director of Development. Now, Ruth had a lifelong passion and interest in music, and she was trained as a classical pianist. And so what she found was that in this role as development director, she was able to use her passion for music with her relationship building skills, her analytical skills, and all of those skills that she developed in her legal practice, she was able to take into this new role as a development director. And so again, she used those same skills. She's using them in a different way, but she's also doing it in a way that also honors some of her passions. So she found this job, and it is a paid job. She's not a volunteer. She's an employee. So she made this transition into something that's meaningful for her and reflects what she wants out of this life stage. So I'd also like to talk about the paycheck side of this. So when we think about encores, you know, for some people, looking at an encore, they may be looking at skill-based volunteering, but more and more people are looking at encores and including that work piece as a paid way that they're also supporting their lifestyles. There's many compelling financial reasons to continue to work in some capacity past traditional retirement age. When we delay collecting Social Security until age 70 versus age 62, we can receive significantly larger benefits. For many people, continued work in some capacity offers a higher standard of living and extended savings because we delay when we're tapping into some of our savings. And so instead of that three-legged stool that financial planners are talking about, that work income can really offer some additional stability as we look at our finances. And this is especially true as we're looking at the next wave of retirees who are entering that traditional retirement age, without pensions like previous generations had, and relying more on their savings and Social Security. And one of the big proponents of this is Chris Farrell. Some of you may have heard him on NPR, Marketplace Money. He also has a fabulous book called Unretirement: How Baby Boomers Are Changing the Way We Think About Work, Community, and the Good Life. And Chris Farrell challenges us to think about how work can be part of our retirement lifestyle, and that not only is it good for individuals, and we do know that work is good for us from a cognitive perspective as well as a social perspective, but it's also good for our economy as well as the financial health of our social safety net. So if we all worked a little longer, then things like Social Security will have a longer runway on their sustainability. And you know what Chris Farrell talks about is that most people need a break. They may be very tired of their work, but they don't necessarily need a 30-year break. And so as we think about this concept of retirement, we're rethinking this from an individual as well as from a society level. And when we look at older workers, what resonates? We know that older workers are often ready to give up that job that they have, but they still overwhelmingly are saying that they expect to work. Surveys say 79, 80%, 76%. They're always 3/4 or higher that they expect to work, but they want to work differently. And again, getting back to what is meaningful at this life stage, we see work that aligns with talents and values, where lifelong learning continues, and where work that offers some flexibility and autonomy. So again, it's work, but it's not necessarily that same job. So what we need are some more bridges. How do we help people shift into these kinds of work that offers them that paycheck, but also offers some of those other pieces that they want in addition to that meaningful work, but also flexibility, autonomy, learning, tapping into those values. And so when we think about an Encore, again, we think about many ways that and many shapes that can take. So some people look at Encore as being an employee, so they're looking for paid work in making a career shift into an employment role. Others are looking at skill-based volunteering. Some look at pro bono volunteering, so just enriching their current job by doing more volunteering. Some people are looking at stipended volunteer work, so given some money that helps them offset some of the costs that they have associated with it. And some people are looking at contract work, consulting work, the gig economy as a way to fill in as well. So again, there's lots of ways that we can engage in work that we need to also think broadly about what it is that we are looking for. So if you're looking for an Encore, you're thinking about shifting into something that is meaningful, that offers you that opportunity. The first piece is to get clear about what it is that you want from work in this stage. So thinking about what kind of work is going to be fulfilling for you, to offer that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose, and that sense of paycheck that you need. So what is it that you're trying to balance, and what is that balance you're looking for? And how can you bridge to that? So getting more clarity on that. And then the second piece is knowing what you have to offer, knowing your skills, and how do you translate that into a nonprofit or translate it into different kind of roles and work. So it's getting clear, but then also being clear about how you communicate what you have to offer and what you're looking for. So there's a clarity piece with it. Another piece is just also to experiment and to get out of your comfort zone. And so Professor Herminia Ibarra, she's a Harvard professor, she's studied people who have changed careers. And there's a piece of it of getting that internal sense of what you want and knowing who you are, but there's also a big piece of just trying things, stepping into it, starting with small steps, what she calls experiments. So don't quit your job to begin with, but start volunteering in a new way. Step into an assignment at work that might help you grow in a different way, that take you in a different direction. So craft these experiments that help get you out of what you're doing now and help you explore if something else is going to be a good fit for you. The second thing she points to is connect with new people. So the people in our lives know us and know us for what we do currently. But when we connect with new people and we introduce ourselves in a new way and we tell a different story about what we are and who we are, then we're also opening up the opportunity to connect in different ways. And so your professional network may need to shift if you're looking at making a career shift. So asking yourselves questions, you know, if you're mission focused on a cause, are you connected with some of the people who are working in that area? Are you following them, you know, on Twitter? Are you engaged with them on LinkedIn? Are you paying attention to what some of the thinking is going out there? So connecting with those new people, going to events, volunteering, all of those things are all ways that you can do that. And then Professor Ibarra, she also talks about exploring and trying out different identities. So thinking about yourself a little differently. She calls it flirting with different possible selves. And so again, allowing yourself to experiment. And this is something that you can start doing now without making big changes. But these little changes can help you calibrate what makes most sense for you and give you confidence in making some of those changes. I also want to mention another possible pathway is to try to find some way that, like a program or something that's offered that might help you make these kinds of transitions. And I'm very excited to talk about University of Minnesota Advanced Careers Initiative, which I'm working with at the University of Minnesota. And we just launched this initiative this fall. And what we're doing is we're bringing people 50 plus back to campus to figure out what's next. And we help them explore different directions, learn about issues that are important to them, and engage in intergenerational learning. And then we place them in a nonprofit to help give them some hands-on experience, trying out their skills in a different way. And so University of Minnesota Advanced Careers, this is a really exciting initiative in higher ed. And Professor Phyllis Moen, who I mentioned earlier, she's the mastermind behind this, but she's looking at higher ed as being a place where older adults also come back to campus to figure out what's next. You know, when we look at millennials and we look at Gen Xers even, but when we look at coming to college, we often come to gain some new skills, to figure out who we are at this life stage, and to decide what we want to do next with their lives. And universities can also be key places for people to come back and do that similar thinking. There's a lot more in common with millennials and with boomers when you look at this quest for purpose and trying to figure out what they want, what that path is going to look like. There's a lot more similarities than differences with that. So with our program, we're bringing them back to campus. It's a 9-month program. We have 2 semesters in the fall. They're forming a learning community, and they're tapping into the academic richness of the university. They're attending a seminar, they're attending lectures, they're sitting in on classes, they are attending lectures that are going on campus. And if you're an alumni, you know what it's like to be on the University of Minnesota campus, that it is this amazingly rich community with so much going on and so much interesting work by professors and speakers on campus, and arts and culture, and just being able to immerse yourself in this environment to come back and just tap into that is just amazingly powerful for people. And then in the spring, what we're doing is linking that with practical experience. So we're going to be placing the fellows in nonprofits. We're not quite calling them internships because internships doesn't quite communicate it. Actually, we've heard the term mid-turnship, but it's an experiential learning where they are spending 10 to 20 hours a week working in a nonprofit for 4 months, working as a skill-based volunteer, using their skills in a new way. It's resume building. They're able to show that they've used their skills in a different way and got exposed to nonprofits. And if you're looking at trying to make a transition from for-profit to nonprofit, that can be really important to show that you understand culture of a nonprofit and that you've done some work in a nonprofit, so whether it's volunteering or this kind of an experience. But it's also an opportunity for them to learn, to continue to learn about what it is that they want to do and how they want to use their skills. And I see that we have a few more questions come in. So I'm going to repeat one of the questions from Gina is repeating the quote by Rosabeth Moss Cantor. So yes, Rosabeth Moss Cantor's quote, let me just pull that on my notes, has to do with this idea that we are looking at purpose across the lifespan, and that we're not always looking for something that's easy. So we're looking for challenging work that gives us a purpose. Let me just scoot back a second and I'll pull that up a second, what that quote is. The happiest people I know are dedicated to dealing with the most difficult problems. They face the seemingly worst of the world with a conviction that they can do something about it and serve others. So again, connecting that sense of taking on something that's meaty, where you feel like you can make a difference. And even though the work is hard, that sense of mastery is critically important and gives us that sense of happiness. She calls it happiness, but I would also say that meaning, that purpose, that sense of connection, that reason to get up in the morning. So someone else mentioned, Monica mentioned, can we please discuss the pros and cons of returnships with large companies and the probability that leading to a full-time employment? Returnship is an interesting concept that was originally looked at as bringing women back who had stepped out of the workplace and had typically for child care and bringing them back into the workplace. You know, no surprise, employers, as they're looking at pockets of skilled people, see that, you know, anyone who's left the workforce for reasons unrelated to, you know, the desire not to work. I mean, they left because they were caregiving or for their family needs. Anyone with that they left for these reasons still are bringing a lot of talent, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of skills back. Returnment typically will bring, it'll be a phased period of time where people will get some experience and get up to date on things that are going on in their field. So even if you're gone for a few years from a field, we know that the pace of change is so fast that people need to get updated on that. And so some companies are purposefully and structuring opportunities to bring people back to get back up to date. But those are pretty quick retooling because they're bringing in their years of experience, but it's helping getting them up to date. And the probability of leading to full-time employment, you know, it depends on the organization. You know, some organizations, like in accounting, like Deloitte in particular, has done some creative work around this, which they call mass career customization, where they allow their people to dial up or dial down careers where, you know, at times when people have heavy child care responsibilities or even elder care, to be able to step back from a job and dial it back, and then be able to step into a job and lean in more when people have times in their lives where they're ready to go full force. But the ability to do that without negative consequences on career trajectories is really important. And I think those industries where they are trying to find people where there's shortages of talent is going to drive more of that and drive more of that access to full-time employment, as well as access to things like workplace flexibility and maybe also part-time employment in meaningful, substantive jobs. So we do see some shifts with that. So the other piece of it that I'd like to talk about, just about a resource, is I had mentioned Marcy Albahar. She wrote this book called The Encore Career Handbook, How to Make a Living and a Difference in the Second Half of Life. She brings a powerful personal story. She had been an attorney and was very frustrated with the 24/7, long hours, constant demands. And so she left her career as an attorney and then became a journalist and actually wrote for the Washington Times and, or excuse me, the New York Times. And she has written a lot about things like slash careers, of how people combine different careers, like, you know, I'm an artist slash, you know, waitress, or, you know, how we don't just have one careers, and this gig economy. And this book is a great resource if you are thinking about what you might want to do next, if you're imagining pursuing an Encore career. This is a very practical book with ideas about how do you finance an Encore. So if, you know, how do you save for it, and how do you get to the point where you can actually do this financially, going back to school and weighing the pros and cons of that, and the cost associated with it, and what's the potential benefit of that, how to network at this life stage, you know, our taking advantage of our networks. That's one advantage of being an experienced person, is we tend to have good networks. Marketing yourself in a different way, and then it's got a lot of stories. And I think those stories can also help us see how other people have navigated this. So again, wonderful resource. It's a how-to book, and it's very, very practical. I'd also like to point out another resource, which is called Encore Talent Works. This is an online toolkit designed by Encore.org. This toolkit is designed for nonprofits and social enterprises who are looking at this talent base as being people that they want to tap into their talent, for employees as well as for skill-based volunteering. And you know, returning again to Daniel's point about is there really potential for people to make these moves, we are finding employers are interested in this, but they don't always know how to go about this. So even though it's written from the perspective of the nonprofit, it's also really helpful for individuals who are looking at how to tap into these kinds of resources and the stories. We have a lot of stories about people who have made these transitions, how nonprofits have tapped into the skill base, a lot of resources around this. And so this is, again, a good resource. And if any of you work in nonprofits or government or social enterprises, this is a great resource to share with your colleagues, again, on how do you go about structuring opportunities for people, you know, what are some of the issues in bringing on people around culture, and how do you help train people along all these things. So very practical, again, another practical. The website is toolkit.encore.org. And this resource, as well as information about that handbook, can be found at that encore.org website. You can explore that site in general. And then I also do want to talk about, again, this Encore as a community. So encore.org, again, started by Mark Friedman, it has really become not only a national movement, but also an international movement. Mark Friedman and others in the organization are speaking around the world, Singapore, France. We have interest in these kinds of things coming all over the world about just how do we tap this talent. And the Encore.org website can connect you with resources in your community. So I know some of you are not local to the Twin Cities, and so recognizing that in your community there may be programs, maybe not necessarily like the University of Minnesota UMAC program, because we're pretty much on the front end of that, although coming to a university near you is my guess if we look 5 years out. But there are other kinds of programs that do try to help bridge these kinds of transitions and help people figure out how to make these transitions. And Encore.org is just a great place to, where we cluster some of these resources, also fellowships, and then overall just a whole network of people who are passionate about this. So I appreciate your being here today. If you have any more questions, please do share them. We're coming to the end of our time, but we do have time for maybe 1 or 2 additional questions. So if not, my best to you. Thank you for attending today, and I wish you well. Thank you. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you for a fabulous webinar. In closing, members of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association make initiatives like this webinar series possible. Thank you. You can help make our global community of alumni stronger than ever by joining us as a member today at umnalumni.org/membership. And this is the conclusion of today's webinar. Thanks so much and have a great day.